Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with author, motivational speaker, coach, and the founder of BigBoldBrave Clint Hatton. Based in Dallas, Texas, he has been coaching individuals and teams for over 20 years with a proven track record of helping people grow personally, achieve success, and build healthier marriages and relationships. Clint has discovered even the most successful people struggle with fear, gratitude, making courageous decisions, and being clear about what they really want out of life. He has been helping bring clarity and action to all kinds of people for many years. Enjoy this interview.
Clint, thank you for taking a minute out. It's great to meet you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. I appreciate you calling me and having a conversation.
Absolutely. My pleasure, man. So before we get into your life, your busy life as an author, speaker, you're a coach, you got a lot going on, and I'm curious, over the last 3 years with COVID, it really threw things upside down for a lot of people. How do you survive COVID? How does it change the way that you live your life and conduct business now that the world's opening up?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. For us, it's maybe a little more complicated than some in that our oldest son passed away in a tragic accident on September 23rd of 2019. So that was just a few months shy of COVID rocking the world. So for us, those two things coincided at exactly the same time. So the impact that had was, for us, sure, there were challenges, and this is not to diminish anything else other people went through with COVID, of course. There was a lot of people that went through some really difficult things and many people that, lost loved ones. But for us, losing our son was far more devastating. So we were really dealing more with that in terms of just, the real world, in terms of how we function from day to day. At that time, I had been a pastor for 17 years up until January, so I'll just say that really quick. And so we had launched a small church. So when COVID hit, we were still in a very early phase with just about 8 families, part of our launch team, and we had been meeting in the home. So it didn't have a massive impact in that, I didn't have this big entity that, now we have hundreds or thousands of people, and how are we going to connect with them? And, I didn't have to fight that battle. We did Zoom for probably a month just so that the families that had some people that had some health concerns, and, everybody was trying to figure it out, right? Especially in the beginning. And then we started doing, just in our homes, we would meet, and really it didn't impact us a whole lot when it came to that. So, but I would say, for us, it had an added benefit, if I could say it that way, just because it really allowed us to minimize how many things we needed to go physically do outside of our house while we wrapped our minds around, the early part of that grieving process.
So I'm curious, with all of that said, to kind of get a handle on, what you do for a living, I want to get a better handle, and I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day, and one of the kids looks up at you and says, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
Yeah, well, what I would say is I work with people, and I work with companies and organizations to inspire people and help people understand that they are courageous and help to pull courage out of them so that they are not afraid to live their life and try new ideas and experience new things. I unlock the creative genius in people. In other words, I help them discover and grow their ability to solve problems with their life and with their business. And then I also really work pretty deeply with people to help cultivate compassion in their life, in their relationships, in the workplace, and those types of things.
So when you were in the third grade, what was your dream to grow up and become?
Yeah, I love that question. It's funny. I'd have to answer it a couple of different ways, only in this sense. During that age range of my life, I was really into dressing up like a variety of different things and acting things out. So, I had a legit fire engine, battery operated, that you could actually push on the gas pedal and it would go, a lightning fast 5 miles an hour or whatever. And I would dress up as, now I'm going to date myself here, there was a show back then called Emergency 51, which was a show about firefighters. So I did that. I had a cowboy outfit with the side gun. I had Army stuff. So I was really into playing different roles. But I think, more realistically, I was an athlete. I love football and baseball. And so at that stage, it was all about, how maybe someday I'll play in the major leagues. So that was that was probably the biggest dream at that stage.
So speaking about age and being dated with your reference there, we all get to that point in our lives where we get reflective and look back and wonder how things turned out. Are you happy with the dream you had and with how everything's turned out for you now?
I really am. I am, Joe. Obviously everyone faces some challenges in life. There's bumps and bruises, and we've suffered some pretty difficult times at different times, and certainly a massive gut punch when we lost our son a few years ago. But what I'm happy about, and why I can say that with conviction, is that I'm a better person. I'm still growing. I'm a better version of myself today than I was even a couple of years ago, certainly 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And I think as a human being, that should be one of our goals. I have an amazing marriage. We'll be celebrating 20 years in April. So that's coming up pretty soon. I have 2 other sons who I love and adore, and our relationship is really strong, and just family's always been a high priority. So, I think as far as just to answer your question directly, I would say the answer is yes. Now, that said, I have greater goals and dreams and things that I still want to accomplish. But I'm satisfied with who I've become, which to me is one of the biggest keys.
So to draw strength in your life, who's consistently been a hero or a role model for you?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I have to say, I was a pastor for 17 years, but it wasn't so much the role. It's just, faith came into my life at about 31 years old. And for me, that means, faith in Jesus. And, that has been a massive impact in my life foundationally in many different ways. So certainly that. But then, as far as just people goes, I've been very fortunate, Joe. I wouldn't be able to narrow it down to one. Over the years, I've been in organizations or involved with people that are, some really top-notch leaders and high character, high integrity type people. So, I remember I was in a network marketing company back in the late 90s. So this was when I was about 30, and I had just come out of, I abused drugs for a big chunk of my, especially late teens into my mid to late 20s, including about a 9-year stretch of doing meth. And, I was a professional salesperson, so not the stereotype that most people think of when they think of somebody who's abusing meth, but I was stuck. And there was a company called Cemetery I got involved in. There was multiple executives that were involved in that company that were all amazing, but there was 2, a gentleman named Rudy Reback, and then another one, his name was Dr. Ola Madsen. And just with some of the trainings and some of the opportunities I got to speak to them one-on-one, I credit them with being the 2 people, or two of the major players in that stage of my life, of really setting the tone for me, understanding that, I didn't have to be a victim of bad decisions of the past, that I could grow into who I wanted to be. I could be someone who consistently had character and integrity and inspired people. And that really helped set me on a new trajectory, just in terms of being a lifelong learner and, wanting to not just succeed, whether that be financially or relationally, but just be someone who is a good example.
So if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now and spend some time with them, who would it be?
Wow. Yeah, gosh, that's a tough one. I mean, one of the things that I enjoy more so in this latter part of my life is talking with people that think very differently than me. So I think of people like Elon Musk or people like Joe Rogan, people who have had a major influence in either, industry or culture that I don't necessarily align with everything in their value system, but I'm always fascinated to hear how people think, what led them to get to where they are and why they do the things they do. So I would say, someone like one of those two.
So, the one thing about our lives is that, when that alarm clock goes off, the proverbial one, whether it's real or not, we get up and we start going. There's things that motivate us. There's things that drive us to be who we are and to do what we do. What is that for you? What is it that really gets you going every day?
Yeah, well, it always starts, and I mentioned this already, it always starts with my family. I have a high value for my marriage. It's something that, we have had a beautiful relationship, and I consider her my best friend. And so, being the best husband I can be is a huge motivating factor every single day. And the same thing as being a father, I consider those two roles that I play, because, we all play multiple roles, right? So for me, those two roles motivate me in terms of just being a better version of myself, a better human being. Now, that said, in this part of my life, especially after, suffering the tragedy that we did, and my oldest son, Gabriel, he was an amazing human being. He became a pilot at 17 years old, a licensed pilot. He actually soloed at 16. He was someone, he taught himself to play guitar. He became an amazing photographer. He was just the type of person, even at a young age, who attacked life. I like to say that if I was going to create a T-shirt for him, people love T-shirts with phrases on them. It would be "What's next?" because that was just how he lived. And so losing him caused me to rethink a lot of things. And that's actually ultimately what led me to launch my company, Big Bold Brave, and to write my first book, which is Big Bold Brave: How to Live Courageously in a Risky World. And that was, inspired by the way he lived life. So, I definitely wake up motivated every single day to use that, even my pain, as a catalyst for a greater purpose, and to, help people crush fear and learn how to be courageous and do the things that they dreamed of doing, not to allow the bumps and bruises of life to get in the way of them, going for it. And so as far as just a mission beyond being a husband and a father, it's certainly my new venture here with Big Bold Brave.
So the one thing too about our lives, you had mentioned some rough go with drugs and being in sales and all of that. But let's go back to your childhood and let's find out how these seeds were sprinkled in you. You're obviously highly driven, highly motivated. How did all this begin, and how did those seeds take root and become who you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. As far as my childhood goes, I really felt like I had a very normal childhood up until I was about 11 or 12 years old. And, my parents were very hardworking, so I think I definitely get my work ethic from them for sure. But they weren't necessarily risk takers, and, they certainly weren't entrepreneurs. They just, they worked their jobs, they paid their bills, so there was some qualities I got from them. But I think as far as, what I do today and how I go about things, that really came from some tough times. When I was about 11 or 12, my dad ended up having an affair, and they had me late. So they had actually been married over 25 years already. So as anyone can imagine, that was a pretty devastating blow to my mom. And, they got married at like 18, 16 years old. So when this happened, I have an older brother who's 8 years old, but he had long since moved out of the house. So it was just me and her. She suffered from suicidal ideation during about a 2-year stretch when they were apart and kind of trying to figure out how to reconcile. That included a couple occasions that almost killed me as she was trying to take herself out. And so what came out of that is, as I went along in life and, encountered people who had tough things happening to them and things they were going through, I had empathy and I had compassion and I really wanted to help. And it was interesting, Joe. I don't know that I could say, there was anything that I recognized at the time that was leading to it. But even from a very young age, for whatever reason, people would just open up to me. And I'm talking about, often complete strangers, not just people who had gotten to know me. And even in my 19s and 20s when I really didn't have much wisdom to give or to coach anybody, certainly, but I would have people just open up and tell me some of their most intimate, darkest, secrets or things that had happened to them. And so, I had that strong desire continually to just help people and to help people through the difficult times in life. And so I think, seeds were planted in terms of my desire to want to help people for sure. I would say as far as seeds being planted inside of me that, helped me become capable and actually have some wisdom and some expertise, if you will, to be able to really help people, that didn't come until my 30s. And as I mentioned earlier, that came through my experience with, several incredible mentors. Again, my faith, certainly is a factor in that, in growing in my faith. And, I've been a lifelong student, Joe. I think, as a coach in particular, if you're not a lifelong learner, if you're not someone who already recognizes that you don't know everything, that even if you've been doing this a long time and even if you're very successful, you still have major limitations and need to continue to grow and learn. And so I think just having that mindset has really helped me be very effective in my ability to help people today.
So I'm going to hone in on that word that you said there, wisdom. And, of all of the people that, and all of the avenues that you've been down in your life, I'm curious, if you had a dream tonight, you ran into the 20-year-old version of yourself, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on what you've learned, the wisdom you've gained, what would you tell your young version?
Yeah, I think what I recognize now that I certainly didn't know then was, the environments you put yourself in, the people that you put yourself around is so incredibly important. Jim Rohn is famous for the quote that, you're a product basically of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And, first I have to admit that I was one of those 5 people, right? I had faulty mindsets. I had terrible coping mechanisms. So I think I would tell my 20-year-old self, man, you need to get yourself around some people that are living the type of life that you truly want to live, and to be teachable, to be coachable, to, not be stubborn and think you need to figure out everything on your own, but allow people into your life and allow them to help mold you and coach you.
So when you look back on your life, what are you the proudest of?
Right now, at this stage of my life, I think this is going to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to go back to my marriage first. We've been pretty public people for the majority of our marriage, and so I'm only saying that from the sense that, our marriage and how we operate has been pretty open. People have been able to observe that, and then obviously we have a lot of more intimate friendships that really know the deeper side of us. But we really work hard together to have a very solid marriage, and I think we have done that, and I'm proud of that because I really believe if in the home in particular, and not that everybody has to be married, they don't. You can be very successful, very fulfilled being single. So let me say that real quick. But for those who do choose to get married, the quality of your marriage is going to have a massive impact on everything that you do. And so if you're not prioritizing it, you're going to have holes. You're going to have, dips and challenges that you wouldn't otherwise have if you made it a major priority and had a very healthy relationship. And I want to make that clear. That doesn't mean that we're perfect. It doesn't mean that, we never argue or challenge each other or have fights. What it means is, though, is we've learned how to communicate to each other. We allow each other to continue to grow. Neither one of us are the same person that we were, thank goodness, 20 years ago and 15 years ago and certainly even 3 years ago when, we lost our son and then COVID hit and everything else. So I think it all starts there. I'm proud of the father I've become as well. Again, certainly not perfect in that. And, I apologize to my boys when I mess it up and, just be honest about it and could have done better. But I think for me, those two things are ultimately what I'm the most proud of. And then whatever I do in business and to help other people is certainly meaningful, but not as significant.
So in your life of work and helping people, you give a lot to people. What has been one of the best client responses or fan letters you've ever gotten?
I've gotten a lot of great testimonies in both. I've done some one-on-one coaching. Obviously, I speak publicly or have been speaking publicly for a long time. And then, of course, I just wrote the book, to come up with one. There is one that's just really near and dear to my heart that recently came out. And it actually is one of my oldest friends. So, normally if I was asked a question like that, I would probably pick someone who's, maybe just strictly a client or someone who read the book that doesn't know me. But it was really meaningful because, there was people that were obviously intimately involved in our lives. And so when we lost our son Gabriel, they lost too. And even though this was a very dear friend and one of my wife's best friends that spends a lot of time with her, after she listened to a podcast interview that I did about Big Bold Brave the book, and she recently is about 3/4 of the way into reading it, just to hear the healing that it generated for her in her own grieving with our son and losing him, because he really is like one of their sons, and they have 2 boys, I'm sorry. And then also along with that, how we have just modeled as we've walked through this journey, how to, continue to love as a family, continue to love other people and not allow fear. And again, I like to use the phrase gut punches of life to stop us from moving forward. And it's inspired her. And that's so meaningful to me, Joe, because, I didn't write it for my best friends or anything like that, but gosh, to be an inspiration of any kind to someone that means that much to me, that's pretty special.
Certainly is. So everyone out there has a perception of you, an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your colleagues, everybody. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Yeah, well, that's an important question to me too, because I really believe at the end of the day, we all should be more focused on who people think we are necessarily than what we did. And so for me, what that means, and I believe, at this stage of my life, I've done this pretty well. Again, not perfectly, but someone who has high character, when fulfills their commitments, does what they say they're going to do. Someone who is very honest, someone who is skilled with people. People is something, or working with people is something that I'm really good at. I love people. I'm able to connect with a very broad range of people, and I'm talking about whether it's racially, whether it's gender, whether it's socioeconomic backgrounds and professions. I love people, and I think that's how I'm perceived, as someone who loves people. Now, I got to interject something that my wife would say that some of my closer friendships would probably agree with, and that is that I'm intense. And I think a lot of that just has to do with my speaking style. I'm very emotive when I get going in particular. This is more of a conversation, so I'm a little less animated, but if I'm speaking publicly, there's obviously a lot higher energy level. And so I can be perceived as super intense and maybe not always the fun guy. But, if you're around me long enough, I do like to joke around. I do like to have fun. So I would say those are a few things that come to mind.
So Clint, if anybody out there wants to hire you, get their hands on your reading or your writing, or know anything more about you and your world, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, the best place to go would be my website, which is BigBoldBrave.us. I like to say us because I believe collaboration is the greatest tool on the planet, and we don't do anything, significant alone. So at BigBoldBrave.us, they can find, everything about me in terms of, speaking and the book and all that. I will say though, you probably have some international listeners. So anyone outside of the United States, you would want to go to Amazon or something like that to pick up the book, just because of shipping issues. Going to be a lot easier for you to acquire the book that way. And then I started a weekly newsletter, Joe, that I'm just giving away some free content and some fun stuff every week. It's very short. It's not a long read. And I've already had quite a few people say that there's been some helpful stuff there. So that would be a great place for them to go.
Cool. Clint, you got a great, redemptive, wonderful story. I really appreciate it. Very inspiring. Thank you for opening up and giving us some time.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. And you be blessed.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.